episode 25. Okay. And all right. Welcome everybody to episode 25 of the Navigating Now virtual roundtable series brought to you by Thoughtium. We want to welcome everybody joining the Zoom room who have registered for today's talk. As you all know, and I know we've got a couple regulars each time, the chat box will be open. Feel free to put in your questions, say hello to the other folks in Zoom. We also want to welcome everybody who is tuning in via LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook. We stream live every Thursday at 3 o'clock to those three platforms. We want to particularly welcome those folks who are stopping by via LinkedIn. We know we have a host of folks that tune in each week on LinkedIn. We will be taking a look at the comments section, so feel free to say hello or drop a question for our panelists in the LinkedIn chat box. As you all know, we started at 3 o'clock every Thursday. We'll go for about 35 or 40 minutes with our guests, and feel free to ask questions throughout. We'll take some time to pause and ask those. And if we don't get to them, we'll try to cover them towards the end. We are 25 weeks into the Navigating Now Roundtable series, and this has just been an incredible run for us, bringing leaders to the table, talking about topics that matter most to us on a week-to-week basis. What has been so great for me is inviting leaders back to the table who joined us very early on. And we have one of those today. Tom Schoenherr, the CCO of Ambry Genetics, is on today. He's at the table. He is a friend. He is a great part of the Thoughtium community. Most importantly, he is a leader across a handful of industries. Tom right now leads at Ambry Genetics on the West Coast, and he's going to tell you a little bit about the way that he has led over the course of the last 20 to 25 weeks, some of the great things that Ambry are doing right now to meet the needs of their customers, where it really matters most. And also we're going to talk leadership and how leadership maybe has evolved this year as we've all been navigating now. So Tom, thanks so much for joining and welcome back to the table.
Thanks for having me. Happy Thursday.
Absolutely. So I always like to connect the dots in terms of, those folks who join the community. As I mentioned before, Tom's a leader in the diagnostics industry. He plays a big role in the development of a lot of people's careers, including myself. Tom was a leader at a previous organization that I had joined about 5 or 6 years ago. And since then, Tom has just been a big part of my growth and development. He's been a mentor. And he's really informed the growth of Thoughtium over the years. So first and foremost, Tom, thank you. And again, it's just so great to be connected year over year as you continue to grow in your role and we continue to grow as well.
Pleasure has been all mine, my friend. That's for sure. Yeah. It's fun to watch you expand your wings. That's for sure.
Thank you so much. So you were on episode 5 and it was the very beginning of May. And we were just starting to unpack the near and long-term implications of COVID and how it was going to affect your industry. I remember you were on a panel of 3 or 4 others. Three others, yes. None of whom were in diagnostics.
No.
And, we had a restaurant owner and we had someone big data, Hickory Farms. Yep. But there was a lot, we found in those very early episodes, there was a lot of commonality in terms of some of the things that you all were tackling. The obvious, right? How do we maintain continuity with our employees? How do we ensure the sustainability and growth of our organizations? And how do we see, through this? At the time we were talking about post-pandemic. When was the last time you heard that term post-pandemic, which is such a riot? So maybe we'll start here with, what's new with you? What's new with Ambry here now 20 weeks prior to or post, us getting together back in May?
Yeah, no, great question. The pandemic had a pretty negative impact on our industry as a whole. So we were having some of the best months and weeks in the history of our company leading up into the pandemic. And for those of you who don't know, Ambry Genetics, we're one of the world's largest genetic companies, focusing primarily on hereditary cancer. So we deal a lot with cancer patients and we support them with very viable genetic information that gives doctors actionable data so they know what to do from a next step perspective. So it's pretty serious work. Our industry as a whole took a major hit when the pandemic hit and volumes dropped out because patients were less excited to go to the hospital. The access to hospitals for our salespeople diminished dramatically. And in February, March, and April, you saw this pretty significant downturn, and it was consistent across our industry. Forced us to get really good at virtual interactions, how to support our patients from at-home collections, other processes and protocols we put in place in the new virtual world that we were working in an effort to get our core business back on track. And I'm, proud of the team because we have bounced back very aggressively. We're roughly back to pre-pandemic levels right now and accelerating every week, every month with some of our new initiatives. So things have really turned around for the positive for our organization. One of the other big things that we did, and from my perspective, like any company that could be doing something about the pandemic should be, especially if you're a healthcare company. And because of our skill set in diagnostics, and we have this, 65,000 square foot super lab and all of these brilliant people, we decided to launch a platform and testing to help support the pandemic. So a few months ago, we launched a platform called Care for COVID, and it literally helps people get back to school, get back to work. We've implemented this in dozens of school districts across the country, lots of employers, health systems, and we symptom check them every day. We flag those folks who are at high risk for COVID. We then send them a kit so they can get tested. They spit in a tube or get a swab. It comes back to our facility within 24, 48 hours. We then send out the results. We've built portals for the employer to manage all of this and really to service the community. And it wasn't about driving business or revenue. It was primarily, let's do the right thing as a healthcare company. Let's take our resources, let's put out a platform and testing coupled together and really see if we can't help people get back to work. And we've successfully done this with dozens and dozens of clients thus far. So that's kind of how we've responded to it.
That's incredible. And I know you were talking about this as early as the last time we connected in May. And maybe at that time you were making some decisions in terms of how you're going to reallocate, resources. Was there a point where you as a leader had to decide, or maybe I should ask, was there at all any resistance to this pivot in the spirit of let's just make sure that we keep the lights on and that we're continuing to drive growth? Was there risk in, and I call it a pivot, but you're more so leveraging the best of Ambry, right, to meet the more immediate needs. But, was there a gap that had to be filled? And were there folks that were saying, hey, we really should think about whether we need to invest in this gap or whether we need to really just keep the lights on?
Yeah, no, that's a great question because we experienced both. The early on, the initiative just had a lot of support and a lot of traction and people were excited about it. But do consider the fact that our volume and business had dropped off by about 60%. So you had all this incremental resource capacity. So when we launched this, we were slowly but surely getting back to pre-pandemic levels. And the North Star for us was this was the right thing to do. And it would also, let the market know that we're more than just a hereditary cancer company as well. So there was good strategic reasons to do it. But the North Star was this can't jeopardize our core business. And the minute our core business starts to come back, we really need to think about the resources that we have and where to focus those. And our core business came back a lot faster than we forecasted. So we did start to run into an issue of we have this new platform, new initiative, and now our core business is coming back. How do you support both? And so, tough strategic decisions were made there to continue to drive the Care for COVID program, add more resources so we could keep the level of service where we would expect it to be, but then shift everything back into our core business. And that's happened over the past, say, 30 to 45 days.
Now, I know you all have been a value-driven and care-driven organization. What was the general sentiment and acceptance of this initiative? I can imagine there were a lot of people that were very eager to step in and develop, services around the pandemic. How did you rally people around this initiative, or did that happen naturally due to the fact that you've got people that really have, patients and customers at the forefront of what they do?
Yeah, I mean, a little bit of both. And I'll give credit where credit's due. One of my executives, Rob Geigley, this was really his thought process and his initiative that, we sponsored, but he was really driving it through. So to give him credit where credit is due. And it's a difficult thing to try to manage without authority, rally different departments around an initiative that's somewhat outside of their wheelhouse. We were able to effectively get this done and launch a very successful product. It'll generate tens of millions of dollars of revenue for us, but more importantly, get a lot of employers and school districts back on track. And that was really the primary goal for the initiative was that. And then the secondary initiative was around the care platform itself. It stands for our comprehensive assessment, risk, and education tool. And it's really a population health tool designed to identify people's risk way further upstream than when the disease actually hits. We focus in cancer today and genetics, but cardiovascular disease, diabetes, behavioral health at some point. I mean, it has a lot of runway to do more things. And this was a good opportunity for us to input the care platform into the employer space. So there was also some strategy there. So with that, the company, I think, was excited about it. I think as the core business came back online and growing fast, they were less excited about it because now this is more work on top of the limited resources you have.
Right.
But we've found a good balance, I think, where we're at today.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's incredible. And, you and I, before we jumped on, we were talking about, now we're, 25 weeks into this, and we're able to look back and start to see what are some of the kind of permanent shifts that have occurred that will not go back. And what are some of the advantages or muscles that you all have built maybe over the last 25 weeks that you feel like will power the direction of the organization for years to come?
Yeah, no, great question. The business world and environment will never be the same. That I'm convinced of, 100%. It will never be the same. This pandemic has forced us into becoming efficient outside of the office space, realizing that we can do a lot of things virtually. As I tell my team, we have to be empathetic to our employees for sure. So empathy is important, but accountability can't disappear either, right? So as much as we have a lot of working parents, and I feel for folks who are at home and they've got 3 young children that they're trying to educate as well as do their jobs, you have to be flexible and have a lot of empathy for your employees. However, we still have a business to run and patients to take care of. So you had to find that balance. The other thing that I've found from a leadership perspective is really, and we know this, but like really good leaders, I think, emulate the behaviors they want to preach to their teams and they expect from their team. And it's one of those, you have to walk that walk and not talk the talk. And work and life have now done this, where people, their living room is turned into their office. And it's really hard for them to turn it off. This pandemic has increased anxiety. People are drinking more. There's just a lot of bad behaviors that are happening. They're more exhausted than they ever were before just because of the situation. And as a leader, it's really important that your folks are healthy and rested and focused. And if you're not doing that yourself and letting them know that, you don't have to work 10, 12 hours a day. It's okay to turn it off in the middle of the afternoon if you need to go stretch your legs or get some exercise. It's important that you're eating well and sleeping well, and making sure, they hear that, but then B, you're emulating those behaviors more so than ever before. Like, that's really critically important for, I think, the health and the happiness of your workforce for sure. And so that's not that it was a revelation for me, but it just became really important that we do that stuff.
Yeah. I want to double click a little bit into that. You talk about the empathy and accountability, which is always such a delicate balance. And it feels like it's even more of a focus right now as leaders, is creating that balance between empathy and accountability. I will always say there's 2 leaders that I've worked for that, and you're one of them, that could lead at such a high level, where you would you just drew people in and people wanted to follow your direction and you were able to articulate that direction very clearly. But at the same time, I know you as someone who can walk into any meeting room and at any given point potentially know more than anybody in the room about the topic. So you have this incredible balance between, and I call it the clouds in the dirt, right? They're right behind me, the clouds in the dirt, right? The strategy, the moving forward, and the ability to drop in and emulate what it takes on a day-to-day basis, the knowledge, the expertise, the work to move an organization forward. And my question for you is, at this time, do you feel like as a leader through the pandemic, you've had to elevate more and ensure the direction of the organization for your people? Or do you feel like you've had to drop in more and be, shoulder to shoulder with your people doing the work?
Yeah, no, another good question. I'll correct part of that statement.
Great.
I do feel confident that I have the ability to help set vision with my team and then get people pretty much rallied behind that, inspired and all moving to the dancing to the same music. And so, I've had success doing that. As for my ability to walk into any room and know more than other people in the room, to be honest with you, if I find myself being the smartest person in the room, I need to go find another room.
I didn't say smartest, Tom. I said knowledgeable.
I like to think that I'm in touch, multiple levels throughout the organization so that I can try to add value for sure. But everyone has a superpower. I think if you're successful in business, mine's been to identify, recruit, and then to hire like really smart people.
Yeah.
And my executive team, like these are some of the best lieutenants I've ever worked with. And they take so much pressure off me from a day-to-day having to be in the weeds, having to QC everything because they're so damn good at what they do. It allows me to really focus on the big picture things. And then as for like my time spent in the pandemic, because of the evolution of chronic to precision medicine and Ambry being such a big part of that, I spend the majority of my time, honestly, is really around like the vision of the company. What do the next 3 to 5 years look like? Making sure that we've mapped out that roadmap and we have the appropriate resources, putting those presentations together, making sure the vision is clear, getting the board of directors bought into it. So a lot of my effort is spent on that with a small handful of my peers versus having to be in the weeds. Now, that being said, my primary job is really just to support all these departments that roll up to commercial, honestly. And so I go out of my way to make sure that you understand where their problems are. You get them the resources they need. You set direction, but then get the hell out of their way. Hire smart people and let them do their jobs. And then if there are roadblocks, then you have to get involved and help them remove that. And I think like really good leaders, and the farther you go up the totem pole, the more important that stuff is.
Yeah. You and I 100% agree. Having a team of people that can not just be on the ship with you, but guide it for you is super important. And I've met your leadership team at Ambry, and we support several of them. And they're just incredibly talented people. And that's a testament to the type of team that you surround yourself, right? Which is a key ingredient to leadership. You talk about, everybody has their superpower. And we love to use this term with our clients, practitionership. The dictionary definition of practitionership is to treat your work like an art form or a craft, right? I sometimes think that in a previous life, I would have loved to be like a sculptor, working on a single block of granite for like his entire career, because it's that focus that I absolutely love. And that kind of long-term dedication and vision to a certain craft. So I'm curious, Tom, what would you say is your practitionership? And of course, as a leader, we all have to do certain things really well. Lead people, set direction, execute on goals. But like, let's drop down into almost on a day-to-day basis. What is the work that you absolutely love to do? Is it like putting together pitch presentations for investors? Is it being on the line with your people? Like, if you had to do one thing all day, every day, what would it be?
Yeah. My folks hear me say this all the time, but like for me, like this can't be a job. It's not a job. It's a lifestyle. Right. And so like, if you really, and the kind of people that I'm attracted to and the kind of folks I try to recruit here are folks who think the same thing. This is not a 9 to 5, just punch a clock. Now, granted, there's roles within our company that are absolutely that, and that is fine. But as leaders, this has to be a lifestyle for you, and you have to love it. And when you love it, it's not like you're working, if that makes sense.
Right.
So like I would say there's two things that I really enjoy about my role. The discussing and setting the vision and direction for where the company's going to go, and then being able to distill that down to the lowest levels of your organization so everybody understands it, everybody's in line with it, and most importantly, they're all excited about it. Yep. And when people are excited about things, the progress, efficiencies, explosive growth, it all just kind of follows. and it has to be fun. That's another core value for me.
Yeah.
Like we spend way too much time working. As soon as this is not fun, I'll go find something else to do. And I try to emulate that and push that into everything that we do here. The other thing that I'm really passionate about, that I love, is the development and the performance of our teams. You're familiar with our Session A process, where we go through and every single employee has a scorecard so they know how they're being measured, and we calibrate hundreds of employees throughout a couple of weeks and make sure that we're increasing the level of expectations, and the performance of the company just keeps going up every year. And listening to, our frontline managers and directors and executives talk about their teams, helping coach them and develop them about different ways to think about it, how to continue to increase expectations and increase performance, and watching them grow every time we do this is so rewarding for me. I love it. And those are long days though. Those are it could be 10, 12-hour days, but it's so worth it because it's very personally rewarding to me. That's the part I love.
That is something extremely unique about your governance process, is the time and the investment that you take in ensuring sustainability of your team, sustainability of talent. You do that through the Session A's, which you just spoke about. You also keep a very tight core. So, maybe speak to that a little bit in terms of how you've been able to develop loyalty the way that you have in a world where, we're all looking for the next opportunity.
Yeah, sure. Especially those of you familiar with the West Coast and Silicon Valley, they'll throw a dart and hit a startup, right? And so there's opportunity everywhere for people to leave your organization and go somewhere else. Over time, and I say we, like my core team, we have cultivated a pretty significant followership. I've looked it up. It's not really a word, but I think you know what it means. And people do want to come with our group when we go from place to place, if that's the case. And it's not normal these days to be working for a company for 15 or 20 years. It's just not. With me, I typically have like a 60-month shelf life for these companies. I like to go into one and identify places who have problems that we can solve, and then take them on a huge growth trajectory. And this one here might be a lot longer because of all the stuff that we're doing. It's multiple companies in one. But we've driven that followership and loyalty, I think, by self-sacrifice a lot. We're super transparent. You always know what we're thinking. We lay out aggressive but yet achievable goals. We make sure our team is rewarded. As you know, I'm huge into people development. And so that has to be like a core aspect of what they get from working with us and our teams. It's expanded much more than just like sales and marketing, and now sales, marketing, service support, business development, market access, medical affairs. So like we're implementing these cultural changes, if you will, across multiple departments, which is kind of exciting. It lifts the whole company. And every once in a while, you have to, if it happens, be willing to sacrifice your own needs for your team. And I won't go into specifics, but I've had to do that a couple of times in my career. My folks recognize that. And they know I put myself in harm's way to make sure that them and their families were taken care of. And you don't have, if it happens, you have to step up and do the right thing. Ideally, it doesn't ever have to happen again. But I've had a couple situations in my career where I've had to, take the hit from the bus to ensure my team was okay. And I think you do that once or twice, and people really start to respect it and know that you're the kind of person they want to go with. I
love that. I've got a handful of other questions that I want to ask, but we do have a couple questions coming in. And so I want to pause and maybe ask the first one, which might be a little off topic, but it's a very important one. And this comes from somebody in the Thought Team community. I'm not going to name names here, but he may or may not be a huge Michigan fan. And he was excited to hear you talk today, Tom. And so his question is, how big of a setback did attending Michigan State become for you in the beginning part of your career?
Well, my first response would be, on Saturday, we can settle this like men.
Right.
For those of you who are not aware, Michigan State football will happen this Saturday, so we're excited about that. But no, listen, at the time, I had applied to 3 different schools. I got accepted to Notre Dame, Michigan, and Michigan State. And to be honest with you, it was a financial decision for me because I had to pay for my own school, and it was closer. And so that's the route that I went. 4 of the best years of my life. I had a great time there. And then as well as I graduated with a degree in electrical engineering and medical technology, because at the time I wanted to be a physician. And then after volunteering, I realized pretty quickly that that is not something I wanted to do. And so then I went down the engineering route. My first big job was Ambry Diagnostics, but that's time that I'd spent at Michigan State getting me ready for what I needed to do in my career was actually super beneficial. So it was a great experience. I was also one of very few that when I was at Siemens, they had an arrangement with Notre Dame. And so they had spent a lot of money and put together an executive management program, which was about like a 9-month gig where you were there on campus and off campus and there on campus and off campus, going through like a mini MBA that they paid a lot of money for their up and coming, directors, next executives. And so I was fortunate enough, I was like one of, there's 120,000 people in that company. I was like one of 20 people that got picked to go through that program. And it was super beneficial. And to your comment there, Mr. Question, the level of the professors that I engaged with at Michigan State, there was a difference between that and that executive program at Notre Dame, I will tell you for sure. But it was just like an amazing experience, but I wouldn't trade the MSU experience for anything.
That's awesome. I wanted to get to this question a little bit later on. And I'll ask it now because it's a quick one, or maybe not. Were you like kind of throughout your education in the early part of your career, were you always reverse engineering where you're at today? And at what point did you start to put the real building blocks in place to say, I want to be a C-level leader within an organization?
Yeah, no, great question. Early on, I think I was just ambitious. I'd like to think in a healthy way, but like a lot of personal. I've moved 11 times for companies and positions throughout my career, and I was just in the mentality that regardless of the opportunity, if it made sense for me, I'm going to take it. And had to pick up my family and move them lots and lots of times, which is very challenging. Not a lot of people are willing to sacrifice like that. The most that I've grown in my career in a short amount of time was probably Siemens. I was there for 7 years. I was a specialty rep. I was a manager. I was a director. I was a vice president of marketing. I was a vice president of specialty sales, all in 7 years. And so I gained a tremendous amount of knowledge by making mistakes, learning from people around me. We had a hell of a run. We had a lot of success growing that business over time. I learned a lot about loyalty and followership and building teams. And I think it was in towards the end of those years at Siemens where I really wanted to get my arms around the strategy of the business and start playing at a higher level. And then at some point it just kind of clicks that, you love to manage people, you like to lead organizations. And then you find the opportunities to put yourself in situations where you can do that.
That's awesome. We're going to zigzag a little bit here, but you mentioned something earlier on that I think is fairly unique to your leadership style. And again, the structure that you have in place to develop your people and your benchmark or your bench. And that is the session A's, right? That's the very unique kind of calibration session that you take your leaders through on an annual basis. I want to ask, what are some of the other kind of atypical modalities that you bring as a leader? And I'll give you another example of the way that maybe I've experienced you as a leader. And we work with leaders across, life sciences and other industries. And, I've yet to really work with one who, and it's a really minor thing, but it matters. And the work that I've done with your team, Tom, is really supporting and building learning and development, which I know you have a real focus on developing people. Part of that are these, national sales meetings. And these meetings, I know the face of these meetings has changed drastically in COVID, but there was a time when, the whole company would get together face to face for 3 or 4 days, in San Diego. And, I don't think, you absolutely have set a certain precedent, at least in terms of the way that I approach a meeting like that, in that you believe that if we're going to invest in the entire organization coming together over the course of 3 or 4 days, as leaders, we need to own that experience and we need to spend a ton of time practicing it. We don't outsource it to an external production company where we can show up and read the cue cards. We own the content, we own the messaging, we own the workshops, and we are a part of them. And by the way, we come down 3 days before the meeting and we do 2 days of dry runs and 1 day of dress rehearsals. And thankfully I've been able to be at the center of all of that because it's incredible to see when you have a team of leaders come together and actually curate and plan and execute an experience made specifically for your people. It is felt, right? And the participants, I've experienced the participants of your meetings, really feel the investment and the buy-in. So that's another example of something that I just think is very different and differentiating. Are there other maybe specific methodologies or examples that you can give that you feel like have allowed you and your leadership team to really differentiate in the way that you develop and grow organizations?
Yeah, no, what you highlighted, I think, was a really good example. The learning and development, and I always say that, I think I got this from you, but it stuck. Like most people have training groups, so they train their employees. Like you don't train people, you train pets. You don't train people. Right? So
I got to remember that one.
We have a learning and development organization that is very near and dear to me, primarily because I've seen the results of it. And you were an individual who came into a company to help me establish this. And you literally can measure the results of having a robust L&D program. And so for that alone had me convinced that we have to rinse and repeat this and keep growing it and evolving it over time. Many of my peers don't see it the way I see it. They're like, oh, it's a nice to have. It's not a need to have. For me, it's absolutely critical foundational block that you have to have for success. So that is always one of the first things that we put in there. And then it's the, a lot of the basic stuff, but to your point, like your people will only respect what you inspect. And if I'm not willing to roll up my sleeves and go spend 3 days in a room, making sure that all the content is tight and that we're role playing, we're rehearsing and we're buttoned up. So when our 200 or some employees come to the meeting, they leave there with just a emotional, collaborative, inspirational experience. And we've been able to rinse and repeat this and get better at it every year. So I'm really proud of what the team's done there. The other thing that I implemented is the big companies I was with, like Abbott and Siemens, they would have one big meeting a year. And those were like big productions, very farmed out, things of that nature. So we want to hit some of that wow factor, but then to your point, it has to be very much customized for our team and our strategy and things of that nature, is the mid-year meeting. So I also, the national meetings typically somewhere off-site, go to some nice place, location for people. The mid-year meeting is always back at a headquarters. And granted, we're too big to fit in headquarters right now from a field team perspective, but we, get a hotel and we do that, and we invite all the rest of the company to be part of it. And what I've found is if you're medical affairs or sales and you're not in headquarters, you start to drift away from the company a little bit over time. And so what I've again demonstrated with performance is that every 6 months, if you can bring them all back together and fire them up again and realign on what we should be focused on and get them inspired, you'll see another spike in your business. And so it's been a way for me to get that second half push by having like 2 national meetings, basically. It's also tough for the CFO to swallow. So, he or she are looking at their numbers and she's like, you want to spend what on a mid-year meeting after we already had a national meeting? You have to be able to sell the organization through that as well.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And again, for somebody who had come from larger organizations, it's very easy for us to have like just to fall back on the playbook of old, right? And we all do it. I mean, we jump into new roles or new organizations. We want to show immediate value, so we immediately call on some of our kind of old playbooks, our old patterns, or our old behaviors. And there's times when you based on where you're at in your career or where the company's at in their life cycle, like you have to go against script, right? And I've seen you do that a couple of times, and that maybe leads to my next question before we get to another question that came through on Zoom. Tom, you are you've worked with a handful of organizations. You are not a lifer. You are constantly growing. And constantly growing in your role within your organization, other organizations. What are some of the things that maybe you've learned coming from larger organizations, working with extremely small organizations, and now with an organization that's really looking to grow and scale? And how are you, taking those learnings and applying them every step in your career?
Most of out of the gate, it was a lot of big company experience. Like Abbott's a fairly large company. Siemens is a big company. Even Quest Diagnostics was 44,000 people. So these are big companies. When I went to my first startup, I remember like my first week there, I'm on the phone with United Healthcare. And then the very next hour, I'm in the back room taking out garbage and building a desk. And you'd ask questions like, well, who's going to put this together? Like, well, you are. And I'm like, well, who's going to do this for me? Like, well, you are. And you go from a world of having two admins to like doing everything yourself. So there was a lot of humility involved, to be honest with you, from going from an executive role down into a C-suite in a startup. But one thing that always stuck out to me was how much waste happens in these big companies. And the bigger they are, especially if they're not very mission driven, or you don't have really strong leadership, people, they look at it as a job and not a lifestyle. They look at it as just a paycheck and not a vision or a mission. And I witnessed that happen in some of these big companies. Smaller companies, it's very difficult for them not to be totally bought in and aligned. However, some of the process and protocols and things that I learned in these big companies helped me be super successful in a small organization, because you bring that know-how. And then the small organizations taught me a ton around putting the company's hat on and not just your own department. Being a sales and marketing executive are very different than you running an entire commercial organization or being one of 3 people who are making decisions for the team. Our company, KMPM is about 1,300 people. Ambry is about 800 of it. And so when we make decisions, I'm always thinking about, I got 800 families that are depending on us to not screw this up, or 800 families who are depending on my team to make sure that we can accelerate growth. Even the pandemic, when that hit, I remember being in a room with my peers and we were like, all right, our North Star is to make damn sure we don't have to furlough anybody or lay anybody off. And we went out of our way to make sure that didn't happen. And I'm very pleased to share with you that we didn't have to furlough or lay anybody off, because we took the appropriate measures and did the right things. But that kind of stuff, keeps you up at night. So I think those are some just like evolution of my thought process and things I learned from big companies and small companies and kind of where I landed today.
Yeah, well, it's funny. You got me thinking. I don't know if you remember, but that I had just moved to San Francisco. You brought me to another startup diagnostics organization where you and I met, and I will never forget. It was probably I was going through this transition. I come from big pharma, and I was going through this transition of not only moving from Chicago, a predominantly kind of traditional corner office type of a corporate culture, to now the West Coast. And a startup, right? And so I was going through this transition, and I'll never forget, like within a week or two, I was in a meeting with you and we were talking about one of your upcoming NSMs. And I don't know why I decided to ask this question, but one of the first questions I asked was, what production company will be, supporting this meeting that we have coming up? And I got so many looks across the room because you were you were kind of at the head of the table, and your response was, you said, look, I've been through it all. I've been lowered through the rafters at big meetings before as a leader. And you said, nothing will be as effective as if we build this thing internally with ourselves. And again, that was something that really stuck with me and was a part of my almost learning curve, right? And it's a big transition from large corporate to startup. And, we're now bringing folks into Thought Team that are going through some of the same transitioning. And it's really, really exciting to see a little bit of that kind of nervous energy around, kind of sitting down and saying, we've got all this work to do, and looking over your shoulder and realizing like, I got to do it. Absolutely. And I'm still going through that on a day-to-day basis as a leader, which is, super exciting. And you almost have to embrace that anxiety, right? You almost have to embrace that ambiguity, and you just gotta dive in.
You just have to dive in. And you've seen this as well, but the companies go through these evolutions from a startup into a multi-billion-dollar business, and not everyone is going to fit well as your company evolves. Like some people like to be I want to have my hands in all these different departments, and I want to do all these different things. You can do that at a small company. As the company starts to grow, people have to start like picking the channel that they want to focus on. Some people are not built for a 10,000 person company. Some people are not built for a 100 person company, and recognizing that and making sure you have the right team on the bus as your company evolves is really important. You and I have talked about this. I think, the 4 reasons why startups fail. First and foremost, they run out of money. That's the obvious one. Number 2 is that they hire the wrong people. Number 3 is that they wait too long to let those wrong people go. And you're actually doing both you and that person a favor if it's not a fit. And most people let that drag on way too long. And then the fourth, and this has been well documented, is just really around bad culture. So if you can solve for those four things, you're going to have a super successful company.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was advice that you gave me maybe 6 months ago that absolutely stuck at a point where it really did matter most. And those are hard, those are kind of hard principles to stand by, because we get very attached to culture, particularly very early on in a startup. We get very attached to the culture. And as a founder or as a leader, oftentimes that culture is like, it's the culture that you built, right? That you essentially have to let go of.
Yeah.
Right. So, I'm curious, you've been a part of organizations very early on, and maybe been a part of the V1 of the culture and the environment. And you've probably been then at inflection points where the organization has to go in a different direction. And maybe you and your leadership team were part of the old culture, and you've got to now build an organization around the new culture. Like, how do you go about that?
Yeah. I remember having this argument with one of the first co-founders that I worked with in a startup environment back in 2011. But he was adamant that culture should just be organic and it should just happen on its own. And he was super smart, just one of the most brilliant people I've ever met. And so I was against his thought process, but I listened to him. I'm like, all right, let me see how this plays out. And after seeing this play out that way, I very clearly came to the conclusion that culture has to be deliberate. And culture, you have to spend time on it, and you have to drive it, and you have to make sure it's evolving the way that you and your team want it to. And then as the dynamics of the industry changes or the company changes, the culture has to evolve with it in a positive way. And if you just expect it organically to happen, it typically happens the route you don't want it to go. And if you don't deliberately spend time on it and put initiatives around it and wrap a strategy around your culture, you won't have one, or you won't realize that you have one, but you have a bad one. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I love that. I want to make sure we get to, there was a question here that I think is super interesting, and it's around, the diagnostics industry. The question is, the diagnostic industry is so fascinating. What can other industries maybe learn from diagnostics? And for, that's positives and negatives. You've been in the diagnostics industry for, a handful of years. You've worked in other life sciences organizations. What can we learn from maybe what you're doing at Ambry?
Sure.
And maybe I'll add to it. What are you learning from outside of diagnostics, or what are you bringing into your industry as KM is evolving beyond, the test, if you will?
Yeah, a couple things to deposit with you, and one is just like healthcare in general. I think most experts will say this, is that the future of healthcare is precision medicine. No doubt about that. And simply put, like there will be, and we're already doing some of this, but there will be a point in time where we have therapies that are specific to the individual based on their molecular signature. So looking at their genes, their proteins, their tissues, their organs, and literally like mapped to their molecular signatures, we can prevent cancer and cardiovascular disease and diabetes, and like all these things are evolving. But the cornerstone to precision medicine is precision diagnostics. And so you need imaging information, you need genomic information, you need pathology information, you need phenotype, meaning like the doctor's notes of the disease state. All these different data points are then, data is super powerful if you can do something with it. And so you take all of this data, and the future of healthcare is the ability to like label it, structure it, integrate it, and then model it and mine it so that we can increase the diagnostic yield of what we're getting from today. And I think like the future of healthcare, it's not going to be Ambry or Siemens or Roche. It's going to be Apple and Amazon and Google and Microsoft and the big AI houses, people who know how to collect, label, structure, manipulate data and information to literally give physicians like a paint by number. And these advancements that we're seeing in diagnostics and across the healthcare continuum are going to advance new biomarkers and therapies and things of that nature. So the pharmaceutical companies are super important. I'm learning a lot there. These big data houses like the Microsofts and Amazons of the world are all working on platforms to be able to do exactly what I just articulated, which is super exciting. And so one of the big things I've learned outside of like just running a laboratory test is how important that the bioinformatics and the data is to the future where healthcare is going.
Yeah. And it's almost as if, and again, we get the privilege of being able to, scan the entire life sciences industry. And, I hear you say, we're very interested and involved with pharma. It's almost as if innovation, particularly in precision medicine, is also kind of pushing big pharma in ways as well too. Our pharma clients are starting to see precision medicine not just as a topic of discussion or a wing of their organization that's focusing on leveraging and harvesting data, but as a real platform for the future. And to me, it's almost it's almost speeding up certain areas of the industry that are relying on kind of old models. Do you get that sense as well too as you talk to potential partners?
Yeah, definitely. And I even like the dynamics in the diagnostic world. So we're in the service side of it. So we don't make equipment or reagents. We basically run equipment and reagents to produce results. These results are typically paid by insurance companies, right? And so I have United Healthcare as my insurer. I go to my doctor, she orders a test for me, and then United Healthcare has to pay for it. I envision a future world where the pharma companies are paying for the majority of the tests out there. Because what they want to do is identify the right patient that's suitable for their therapy or for their drug. It'll do that through diagnostic testing. And then they're more than happy to pay for a test if it qualifies a patient for their drug therapy. And we're already starting to see that in the industry, but I think we're going to see more of that as time goes on.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, I've got one more question that I promised at the beginning of the show that I was going to ask. And it's, I think it will potentially serve a handful of folks that typically tune in that are really interested in their own career development. And, those folks that are line leaders, that are leaders of teams within organizations and maybe have aspirations to develop into organizational leaders, potentially reach the C level. As you have seen this position of CCO across, a handful of organizations, what would you say are the one or two like really critical ingredients to being able to, lead at the organizational level?
I had this conversation with our CEO a couple of weeks ago, and we were just talking about performance across the executive suite, and like managing individual contributors is different than managers, than directors, than executives, and you learn different skill sets as you grow up through the organization. But what I'll tell you, at a certain point, like most people are pretty damn good at their jobs. Like you don't get to be a vice president typically unless you're pretty good at the job. That's not where the coaching comes in. It's mostly around their interpersonal, personal skill set, their ability to communicate and collaborate. It's those things that really hold people back, is what, from my experience. And some of these things are hard to teach. You just inherently have some of this stuff or you don't. But being able to stand up in front of a room, whether it's 2 people or 5,000 people, and articulate a very clear vision is super important. And not every presentation you do has to be inspiring, but there had to be some of it where people follow your logic, you're a clear communicator, they understand what you're saying, and they want to follow behind you. Those are really important skill sets. And I've had a chance throughout my career to talk to lots of CEOs of big and small companies. And most of them will tell you they are not the smartest person in the room. They do a lot of collaboration and the communication with their team, and together you come up with ideas around strategy and what to execute. They're not afraid to make tough decisions, right? So if a decision has to be made, they're decisive, they can do that. But it's more about the collaboration and getting more people's buy-in and input before you make a decision and move forward. Those skill sets become really, really important the farther you get up the ladder. And as when you're in a frontline manager job, you can be more of a dictator is not the right word, but you can be very descriptive to your folks because sometimes you need to. And the next level, it changes a little bit more and more. Where I'm at right now is because I have such a strong team, but we socialize concepts, we have conversations. I think collectively we like to come to a end result. I'm not afraid to make decisions by any means. One of my personal development aspects that I'm focusing on for the next 6 months is really creating an environment where people feel more comfortable pushing back on me, because I've been very direct, very transparent. When I think it's something we're going to take a right, we're going to take a right. But creating an environment where folks at all levels, if they don't agree or they have a different opinion, feel very comfortable coming to me and pushing back on it. That's one of my development areas. And I think having enough humility to take people's input is also a really important characteristic of these roles.
What are you maybe most looking forward to, as you look at the rest of your career?
There's a handful of things that I just want to do to experience them. Like the first marathon that I ran, I just wanted to, I'm not a runner, but I just wanted to experience what that was all about. The miserable experience, mind you, but I just want to do it. Country music marathon, Nashville, which is hilarious because at every corner there's like people playing music and handing out shots of Jack Daniels, which is
you're not supposed to take those if you're running.
But I've helped companies scale and grow. I've had some pretty successful exits in a few of them. I've never taken a company public, so that's something that I really want to do just for the experience of it. I see myself in a CEO role at some point in time in my career. It's a whole different level of because the commercial group, and it's not just sales and marketing at our company, like sales, marketing, service, support, like all of these client-facing functions. So it's much bigger. There's a lot of operational stuff to it, but it's all the fun stuff, to be honest with you. Like it's all the sexy departments, right? It's patient interaction, it's customer service, it's growing the business. The CEO he has to deal with a lot of other stuff that's not as sexy. But I want that experience to like round out my overall development. So I think for me personally, that'll probably be the next phase of my career.
Mm-hmm. Well, we like to either start or end these episodes with a story. And, I love to ask that last question in terms of what you're really looking forward to, because I think, as a leader, sometimes you maybe don't understand the influence that you've had on others, folks that have either come through and worked directly for you or have been in an organization, maybe you've even been in the back of an NSM of one of your large scale meetings. And the ability to influence, the ability to impact, the ability to set the tone in people's careers and decision making, and then either formally or informally provide advice, I think is an incredible byproduct of growing within organizations. And particularly when you've had the opportunity to grow within multiple organizations, that sphere of influence gets much wider. And I've told you this before, Tom, but one of the key moments that, I'll never forget in my career was a couple years into my time in San Francisco, and you had left the organization that we were working together for. You had called to kind of see how things were going. We were touching base. You had joined a new organization. You were really excited about the growth there. And you said, I need you to leave this organization and come work for me over here. And I said, Tom, it's been less than a year, and I just moved my life out to San Francisco, and I love you and I believe in you, but like I got to dig my heels in. And you said, we need what you have over here, and I want you to think about it. And I'll never forget, because I'm standing in a phone booth, knees shaking, right? Because here I am, like about to have this discussion, and the words came out of my mouth without even preparing for them. Tom, I would love to do this, but I would love for you all to be my first client. And it was just one of those out of body experiences where I was like, I can't believe I'm saying this, but clearly I had developed this vision and this confidence in the vision that was ready at the time. And, I had a leader in yourself that really believed in me and my work, and you took a shot on bringing me in. At the time, you were my first and only client. And, it's been 4 years to this week that, Thoughteum has grown based on the confidence and the influence that you had on me as an individual, and ultimately us as a team over the years. And those are the moments that, really make careers. Those are the moments that we absolutely remember. And I just want to thank you for being a big part of that moment for me, but more so for my team today, right? Because we wouldn't exist had it not been for that moment and the confidence that you instilled in me. So I really want to thank you for that.
No, no thanks needed. You earned that, my friend. And it's I just remember like watching you in action, and it's funny when you see like rock star A players doing their thing, like watching Babe Ruth swing a bat, or the Sistine Chapel type of thing. And I know it might be exaggeration, but watching you dive into L&D and laying out that strategy and how passionate you were, and like it was one of my first experiences with that. And I'm like, I don't know exactly what that is, but we have to have it everywhere we go. And you've proven it on the field. But yeah, as it relates to L&D, I've never met anybody so passionate and inspiring and logical and strategic and tactical at the same time. So you've helped every company. So selfishly, You can thank me all you want, but I bring you here for a reason. It's because you drive results.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I want to thank you for being on today, for sharing even more insights. It's been great to even just see you lead over the course of the last really 8 months here. I know a lot has changed. But on behalf of our community, thank you for stepping in and for sharing your insights at the table today.
Thanks for having me. Always a pleasure. Don't be a stranger.
Wonderful. Speaking of, I will share, we've got a great November lineup coming up. We want to thank Tom again for stepping in today. We've got JC next week. She is a specialist in corporate wellness, and boy, has that definition changed over the course of the 8 months. We've got Rupert Pierce, the founder of Growing Happy, an incredibly inspiring and growing startup organization that is breathing life into giving back as corporate citizens. Excited to talk to Rupert in a couple of weeks. So we appreciate everybody's interest in joining the discussion. We appreciate those folks who join formally via Zoom and those folks who stop by via LinkedIn and YouTube. We broadcast every Thursday at 3 o'clock, although next week we're starting a little bit early at 2:30, but you can count on us here every Thursday at 3 o'clock Central. We look forward to more discussions like we had with Tom, bringing you all the topics that matter most on a week-to-week basis. Everybody have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, Anthony. Bye now.